Coming up, it's time to finally introduce the fan base to the new host of the Locked On Nets podcast. We'll talk about the offseason decisions. We'll talk about the draft. We'll talk about the state of the franchise and the state of the podcast, right? All coming up in just 1 minute.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht. There is no Doug Norrie right now, but we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know that finally we're going to tap into the new host of the Locked On Nets podcast. But before we get into that, a friendly little reminder that tonight, Thursday, 7:30 p.m., Doug and I discussed and decided, you know what? F it, we'll do it live. Our final show with our run here on the podcast will be live on YouTube, doing it that old-fashioned way. We'll have that show for you, and then we're also going to sit around and chop it up with you, the fans. We said this time and again, and we sincerely mean it, all the interactions that we've had, all the outpouring of support, and a little bit of lament of our departure from the show. The fans have meant so much to what we've been able to do over these past number of years that we wanted to make sure that we took that extra bit of time at the end of our run here to just chop it up with you guys, right? Have those conversations, have those speculations, and it will be officially also our Fan Take Friday. So come in hot and heavy with those later this evening, 7:30 on YouTube. We cannot wait to see you there. But the other thing that's happening is this feed will live on. We're going to have some surprises there when we talk about our live show later this evening, some announcements to come too. But this is going to live on. The YouTube channel, the podcast feed will live on. And really, when we were asked internally by Locked On, some people that we thought would be in the right position and maybe the right person to take over this feed, we ended up coming up with someone that I think really everyone is going to be excited to see. Hopefully, you're going to enjoy the conversation we have upcoming here as we frame where the Nets are and a lot of the discussions you're going to have over the next month. This has been a lot of fun. We will see you on the other side this evening, but no longer needing to delay it. We go ahead and dive into the conversation with your new Locked On Nets podcast host. And with that, my friends, we welcome in Eric Slater, someone that anyone inside of the Brooklyn Nets fan base is obviously very familiar with. You are, Eric, the new host for the Locked On Nets podcast. Welcome into the show, and obviously welcome into the network as well.
Thank you, guys. Extremely excited to be here and extremely excited to be taking the mantle from Adam and Doug and everything, that they've done over these last however many years. It's been great following along and seeing everything that you guys have put together. And I'm excited to just get on this platform and, be churning out that historic volume of Nets content and, kind of giving the fans my take, bringing in some recurring guests and everything that we have to offer about what the latest news is on the Nets. So really exciting stuff.
And obviously, man, I mean, I say congratulations. You and I and Doug have interacted over the last handful of seasons talking about the Nets. You've been on the show before, and it really was, as we know internally, when the network asked, do you have any recommendations, or we're having discussions with some people to come on, when your name came up, it was, oh, yeah, of course. Like that's, that's somebody that resonates. I think we've always said, like, resonates with the fan base. Everyone obviously knows that they can get your content, and we'll cover that there as well in terms of the written word. But also that if we're talking about passing the baton from the way Doug and I have talked about the Nets and covered the team to someone who offers the similar type, I think, of balanced perspective, right? The one thing that we've really valued is being able to say there's the good and the bad of this organization. There's the good and the bad of this team, the players, right? Decision-making. And you have to at least be genuine in your approach to covering the team, I think, to really bring the kind of value that we've appreciated and had with our fan base. And I think you're going to carry it over incredibly well. Where are you currently? Remind everybody where you're producing content, where you're writing, and where people are getting a hold of you before you started the podcast.
Yeah, all my written work is on clutchpoints.com. I've been putting up a lot of volume there for the past. This was my third season on the beat. Now with, taking on this Locked On Nets position, I'll still be doing all of that. I think there'll be a little bit more of a balance between my written stuff and my podcasting. I was on the Believe in Nets podcast this past season, which I think a lot of people knew. And that was usually weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, depending on what was going on with the team, but just kind of balancing that with my reporting job. But I got a lot of people reaching out to me and saying, we love what you're doing on the podcast. We'd love to see more volume from you and you putting out, more content than just once or twice a week. And, I thought that it was something that was tough last year with the written job. And then this opportunity came along, and it was exciting to be able to tell those people, you're going to be getting episodes, 5 times a week, and there'll be no shortage of content or opinions from me or any of the other people that I have come on to talk about what's going on with the Nets. So I think it's a really good fit from my end. And I think that the fans, or at least I hope that the fans will be excited to kind of see me go in this direction.
The one thing for sure is once you're inside the, not just Locked On Nets, but when you're on a podcast feed, when you're on a YouTube feed, guess what? That fan base is going to be there for you, right? And some of the best versions of it, chopping it up, great ideas, perspectives, and then also they'll let you know if they feel like you've gone, the wrong direction with where the Brooklyn Nets organization should be, which actually is the first thing that we just want to touch on. As you mentioned, been on the beat for the past 3 seasons. People are familiar with you, but, we went through the ebbs and flows of Brooklyn Nets getting superstars, going for championships, falling apart, making some interesting decisions about how to dismantle that thing. We just talked yesterday about how this feels unique for the Brooklyn Nets in terms of where they are and what they can offer the fan base coming into this draft class in this season. We're now, with all these draft picks, resetting a very young core foundation. It actually can be about get excited about these young players, and it's okay that there's going to be a lot of losing. Does this feel different to you than it did even last season, where we actually still looked at it as you kept some of the veterans, you couldn't fully move off of everybody, and you didn't necessarily have enough young pieces to sell the fan base on what the next few seasons is going to look like?
I think it's totally different. And I think that it's something that is extremely exciting because from my perspective, I've been following the Nets since I was a kid. I'm 26 years old now. So my first, following of the team, I grew up in New Jersey, was kind of like right after the finals runs and right into like that Vince Carter era. So those are my earliest memories of the team. And
Izod Center, come on.
Yeah,
we all enjoyed it.
Exactly. Yeah, at some games at Izod Center, definitely. And, in that whole time, they've really never had an opportunity like they have in this draft to have this quantity of rookie talent coming in on, in a what is regarded as one of the deepest drafts of the last, 2-3 decades. So I think it's extremely exciting from that perspective. I think, while they fell from, 6 in the lottery odds to 8, and obviously that was a really disappointing result. I talked about that after. They still have a prime opportunity to kind of, really set off on what will be, in my opinion, year 1 of this rebuild. Because I think we had, last year coming off that Mikal Bridges trade, a lot of people saying year 1 of the rebuild. I said that plenty, but I've heard people kind of push back on that. And I've thought about it of saying that was almost really like year 0 of the rebuild. And now this is kind of like we're fully transitioning out of that star Mikal Bridges era into this new era of these rookie guys that they're going to be bringing in. And they could pivot. They could make the move for a guy like Giannis. You never know. You never can bank on anything with this Nets organization. But I do think regardless, the most likely outcome is them having several high-end rookie talent guys on the roster. And while they may be tanking again next season, I think it'll be a completely different feel because throughout that whole season, you'll really have these guys who you're hoping can have, high-end star potential, especially that guy who they take with the 8th pick. And that's going to be the story of something you're monitoring throughout the year. Whereas last year, who are the guys that you were monitoring? You look and say, Cam Thomas was a big guy of what can he be? Can he take the step this year? He only played in 25 games. So we got, kind of cheated out at a lot of that evaluation. And then you had guys like Noah Clowney, was injured a lot, had a little, played obviously and showed some things, but had those 3 ankle injuries. Even Dariq Whitehead still coming back. So from all 3 of those guys' perspectives, from the guys they're going to bring in the draft, even if there is losing or tanking or whatever you want to call it, I think there's going to be important evaluations of all of those players, which I think to some extent will overshadow, how disappointing it can be to be one of the basement teams of the NBA. So I think it's very exciting from that perspective.
Yeah, listen, big performances from some rookies even in losses, are going to, well, look at where he's developing. And you bring up that good point, because coming up here in a second, those handful of players we talk about from a year ago, different stages in Cam Thomas and Noah Klein and even in Dariq Whitehead. But it's interesting to think about some of the key decisions the Nets also have to make away from the draft, and then what they're going to do in the draft. They have 4 picks right now. We know 8, 19, 26, and 27. I tend to think, I don't want to, shocker here, I don't think the Brooklyn Nets are going to make it to 2 for all the rumblings about trade-up packages and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean they can't condense those assets. So we'll get a look at key decisions and also where we think Eric is at when it comes to the draft, finding out whether or not we align on some of the guys that Doug and I have talked about, have hyped about, and then seen come up the draft board with still about a month to go before the NBA draft. We'll do that all here in just one moment. All right, before we do that, we let you know about, of course, our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, heading towards the NBA Finals, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major moment shifts, and can't miss opportunities. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get on the action, and that's why FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in the game before the tip-off and even live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways to play smart and win big. With players that are showing up maybe in the biggest moments, how can you track the trends and build your next bet? What are we talking about in terms of combining those live prop bets, in-game opportunities to go with over-unders, obviously? You can look at maybe the New York Knicks. They're going to get, shut out of the series. We don't know how it's going to unfold necessarily, but we could be talking about Jalen Brunson putting up 40 plus, right? So you get over to FanDuel right now. And if you're a new customer, it's the perfect time to sign up, because at FanDuel.com, you can place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so as we continue with today's Locked On Nets episode, and with our new host, Eric Slater, obviously taking over the reins. And by the way, we didn't say at the top, taking over Monday. Starting Monday, you're getting episodes from Eric Slater, which is the beautiful thing about Locked On. We don't stop. The feed doesn't stop. We said it all the way as we were winding things down. Just because Doug and I were going to be parting from the feed is going to continue on. The YouTube channel continues on. So obviously, we can't speak more highly and recommend. Stick with it. Support Eric, because it's going to be continued excellent coverage. When we turn our attention then, let's talk about this offseason very briefly, and then we'll get into the draft. You mentioned Cam Thomas, the limited games we saw from him, and then you get this little glimmer. Certain segments of the fan base have been like, no, this guy can be the on ball. He can create for others. And then you see the spike, like an assist. And everything to me ties back to Jordy Fernandez when he came in the door and kind of set the standard for what he wanted from Cam. I so desperately wish we had seen 65 games this past season from him to really know if that sample size was the trend and not the blip. Where do you stand on him? And just organizationally, it's a contract year for him. And I don't know if since the day he was drafted, there was ever a clear sense of what the organization wanted to do with him.
It's been really, difficult kind of to get a read on it. And, what you said about the playmaking league, there's no other way. Obviously, Cam Thomas has been a heated debate amongst the fan base for the last 3 seasons. There would be no other way for it to go than for him to set his career high in assists in his last game of the season, in his contract year. So we could just go into the offseason and have that 10 assists or 11 assist game or whatever it was as he's, due for this next contract. But I think that there's still, the jury's still out very much on Cam Thomas, because we saw in the beginning of his career the Nets were a little bit in a different situation. But, I often go back to even after they traded KD and Kyrie during that 2022-23 season, or 2023-24 season, midway through the year, they brought in all those guys, Dinwiddie, McHale, CJ, Dorian, at that trade deadline. And they really needed scoring after that. And during the second half of the year, Cam was still glued to the bench. Even during that playoff series against the Philadelphia 76ers, he wasn't playing. And I think that decision was up to the coaches. And I think Jacques Vaughn, as he replied to many of my questions that I asked him about why Cam wasn't playing, was very forthcoming with why he felt that there was, some other guys that were better suited for what he was looking for. But, I thought at that time, if the organization was really high on him, that he would have been getting minutes in that spot. And I thought that he should have definitely been getting minutes in that spot. And then he comes in the next year, he kind of starts to emerge as a lead scorer for this team. And last year under Jordy Fernandez, Jordy was, very in on playing him, seeing what they had. And as I said before, we only got 25 games with him. And I don't really think it answered too many of the questions that we had about Cam. I think it showed that he can score at, against NBA defenses at a semi-efficient level, which honestly, like, I didn't really have a doubt that he could do that because I think we've
Right.
seen the, natural scoring ability that he has. I think there's still questions, obviously, about the playmaking because while we saw a spike in, towards the end of the year in that, I think we saw some moments down the stretch of his, final 4, 5, 6, however many games where he was missing some big passes, and that shoot first mindset was really clear there. And I just don't know. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point with Cam where he's a point guard or he's a true like on-ball facilitator. And if you're not going to be that type of guy and you're going to be off the ball, you need to do, certain things really well. You need to defend well. You need to shoot threes off the ball well. Cam has shown that he can shoot off the ball well. I think, the defense is obviously still a big question mark. So I think there's a lot of questions of what Cam's going to be in terms of player archetype moving forward, in terms of what role he's going to fill in a rotation, whether it's going to be a starting backcourt guy or whether it's going to be a guy who comes off the bench and kind of provides a change of pace for a second unit. So, I think all of those are still questions. I think based on the situation, I think the Nets kind of benefit, obviously, from the landscape of the offseason with them being the only team that has significant cap space. I think they're going to be able to get Cam back on a, relatively team-friendly deal. I think he'll still get paid something. I think it'll be shorter term, and I think we're just going to enter another evaluation period for Cam where they'll have him under team control for this, whether it's a 1+1, whether it's 2 seasons, whatever it is, they'll have him under control. They'll be evaluating, and then they're kind of going to move forward in this rebuild and decide whether he's a guy that they want to be a part of it long term. So I think there's a lot more questions than answers right now, but I think that we're going to get a bigger sample size, hopefully, to get some answers.
Yeah, that's what I find so fascinating about it, because I think depending on how the Brooklyn Nets go in the draft, because to your point, yeah, playing him as the off-ball 2 guard, of course, like that makes sense. I think we've constantly said that's the best suited role for him. He's not going to be the lead guard. Now the size becomes a factor. The defense, I think the effort was there on that end, certainly in this limited sample this past season. It was better. Doesn't mean that it was good. But if you don't get the either bigger body, point forward, or a true traditional point guard, then what's it going to look like this season? It's going to be more of the same for Cam Thomas. So to your point, it's like, we'll just be evaluating it again and saying, what if? And then at a certain point, as we talk about the rebuild for the Brooklyn Nets, you'll start talking about age and just where the core is. And even though we've said for season after season, Cam Thomas still so young, Nicholas Claxton still so young, well, not as young anymore, right? And now it's Noah Clowney and Jariq Whitehead are very young, and some of these guys are slowly aging out. So it will be interesting to see what they do with it. In that regard, as we start to look a little bit first to the NBA draft, the top of the board, 2 things. One, the Brooklyn Nets in the trade up, I don't believe that that's a thing that's really on the table. You can push back on it if you want to. But then also the idea of putting picks together to go get a Giannis. I mean, where do you live in terms of those things? Because we've consistently said, I think the most likely, if I was hierarchy, would be they pick at 8, whoever ends up being there. I think that they would be open, actually, maybe to marginally moving back, depending on how the board falls. I don't know if a lot of teams are going to call about that. And then these other things, trading for a star right now or trying to move up the board, are very distant thirds for me.
Yeah, I think I would agree in that assessment. And like the trade up for the board, for example, like I was at the combine in Chicago. There was obviously a ton of chatter about what do the Spurs do with this number 2 pick, because there's a lot of different directions they can go. They could trade it for Giannis. They could move back. They could select Dylan Harper to pair with Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox. They could select Harper and trade De'Aaron Fox and go all in on a younger core. So there's a lot of different directions they could go. In terms of the smoke about them trading up to number 2, I just think that it's highly unlikely because, I think if you're trading up from 8 to 2, where it's not a 2-person draft, obviously, it's an extremely deep draft, but the top 2 guys I think are pretty cemented, and there's a consensus among scouts and front offices that those are the top 2 guys. You're going to have to give up a lot to trade up from 8 to 2. We're talking possibly Cam Johnson, 8, multiple first-round picks beyond that. And for a team like the Nets, who are really just void of young talent right now and need to we've seen how important depth has become in the NBA, and they just need to get as many high-level young players on the roster as possible. I think it would be really tough for them to give up what it would take to get up to 2 to select Dylan Harper. Obviously, what they're willing to give up will all be dependent on their evaluation of Dylan Harper. And there was no shortage of opportunities for them to go scout Dillon throughout the year. So from that perspective, I think that's unlikely. If you're talking about 3 with Philadelphia, I think that's much more realistic. But they'd still have to give up, it seems like, whether it's 8 and CJ or 8 and multiple other picks, a decent amount. And based on what I've heard from scouts about, the draft beyond Cooper and Dillon, I'm not sure it makes a ton of sense for that, because you see people like 3, a lot of people say the consensus pick is Ace Bailey. I've talked to a lot of people who I respect what they have to say in terms of draft knowledge and, just talent evaluation skills, who have said that Ace might be 7th or 8th on their board. So it's like, there's not, as much of a consensus, I feel like, on that 3 to 8. I think that talent is a lot closer. And a lot of it's going to come down to depend on, what teams are looking for and what they view as fits for them. So I don't see that as realistic. And then obviously the Giannis conversation is going to dominate the summer. And I do think that the way this Eastern Conference playoffs have shaken out, with obviously the Cavs going down with some injuries, the Celtics seemingly getting just knocked out of the picture for next season with Jason Tatum's torn Achilles, a team like the Pacers, who I don't think many people gave a serious shot to be in the finals, looking like they're going to be in the NBA finals. I think that makes the conversation a lot more interesting. And I think from the Nets perspective, it gives them the ability to talk themselves into going that Giannis route and it being much more viable, which I don't think is completely flawed logic. But then you also have, on the other side, this juggernaut in the Oklahoma City Thunder, who looks like they're going to be able to keep this core together at least for another couple seasons. So I think that could be a big deterrent there. So based on all of that, I think what you said, them running it back, them getting another bite at the apple in the lottery next season, while evaluating all of these young picks and also guys like Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead, I think that that's the most likely path. And I think that, all things considered, it's not a bad path for the Nets to go, and they're definitely not in a bad position.
No, and you mentioned it there also in the first segment about, the year 0 of the rebuild and now it being year 1, right? So I think all those things have to filter through that perspective. And we said it time and again, it's not about, can we get Giannis? Great. Love to have Giannis. I mean, name superstar X. Love to have him on the team. But then it requires who's the 2 and who's the 3 and who's the 4th best player on your roster. And Giannis, even if you keep CJ, let's say that you do it without giving up Cam Johnson, because if you're getting Giannis, you really want to have a Cam Johnson on your roster. Okay. Is Giannis, Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, Noah Clowney, Nicholas? I mean, that's not a roster. Even inside a weak Eastern Conference, I think you'd still be looking and saying, great, like we can compete, obviously, but it's not a foregone conclusion that you're showing up in the Eastern Conference Finals. Some different things happen with Milwaukee, with injuries, obviously, to Dame, but like, go look at that roster and see what happened to them this season, what happened in the playoffs, right? You're not going to be a better roster than what the Bucks had together this past year just by adding Giannis, right? So the phase 2 of it, there's money, but there's a lot that goes into that process of saying, get Giannis and it's all solved. It's not that simple. And I know it's reductive to put that all on the fan base, but there's something sexy about getting the star player and thinking it's just going to solve the problem.
Yeah, the way that I would put it is, I think they'll definitely have, if they say they were to trade for Giannis and they were to give up what would be a boatload of first-round picks, they'll still have cap space left over. They'll still have other, draft picks left over. They'll still have, they'll be free agents this offseason, whether you're talking about, the Minnesota guys like Naz Reid or Nickeil Alexander-Walker, some other free agents. They'll have ability to bring in some guys. There'll be other guys that teams are looking to salary dump that they could probably get as, cheap veteran guys to bring in. So I think there's a world where they could trade for Giannis and have a real shot to come out of the Eastern Conference, be, say, a top 4 or 5 team.
Yeah.
But when you're making a trade like that and you're giving up what is going to be the bulk of your assets, and it's not just about that. I've harped on this throughout every Giannis pod I've done or article I've written. It's not just about what you give up. You're also passing on the opportunity to get a top pick in, this next draft, which has 3 players and possibly more, obviously, that are extremely highly regarded. And, a lot of fans will probably push back on that and say, hey, look, we did that this year. We got the 8th pick, whatever. That's fine. Like, I'm not going to say you're wrong there. I'm just saying there's an opportunity cost associated with doing that. So you're giving up all those assets and you're passing on that opportunity to get a top guy in next year's draft. And when you're doing something like that, you would really love it to be, hey, we're the best team in the East now. We're a top 2 team in the East now. We are really have a clear path to the finals. where I just don't think that's the case. Do I think they can have a chance, like say the Knicks did this year, like the Pacers did this year? Yes. But when you're making a move like that and you're giving up that much capital, I think it's really tough to do that and then come in and say, hey, we have a real like fighter's chance to get through the East to face this juggernaut OKC team that's just destroying everyone. Like, is that the best path for them to go? I definitely don't think so. But I think that the way the East is shaken out has made it more of a conversation. But I think I still land on the build through the draft. And I think that it's the path they're ultimately going to go, but we'll see. I mean, you never know with the Nets.
Hey, the NBA life comes at you fast. You turn around, you blink, and all of a sudden something new has happened. But I do tend to agree with you. Coming up here in a second, let's close things out talking about that draft class. Where does Eric Slater see the Nets going at 8, potentially 19, excuse me. I wish they had 9 as well. 26 and 27. Will they condense some of these assets here? We'll do that to close things out in just one moment. All right. As you know, I always say, as we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets podcast, reminding you that the man sitting to my right is now the new host of the Locked On Nets podcast. So starting on Monday, he'll be flying solo, covering this team, leading all the way up to the draft. There's a chance here that you may see me pop up on the feed still a couple of times, especially as we work towards that draft. Couldn't be any happier to be handing it off, though, to Eric Slater. When we look at the draft, first, let's start with eight right now. Are you the best player available model, or are you the big swing, couple year developmental project? And we talk about like a Senge, obviously has been a name high on Nets list here, certainly. Or are you hoping if Jeremiah Fears, don't think he's going to make it to 8. If Trey Johnson, not going to make it to 8, right? If you're looking for that guy, Knipple maybe is like, that'd be the guy to bring up and say, well, this is impact now, lower ceiling, higher floor, versus we're taking a guy that you're going to have to be patient and talk about him a year, 2 years plus from now.
Yeah, I think there's a big there's obviously a combination of all those factors when you're evaluating players in the draft. There's the floor, there's the ceiling, and I think how high is that floor? How high is that ceiling? All of those things are going to play into the ultimate grade that the Nets have in the player. I don't think there's any doubt, obviously, that they're going to be taking BPA. I don't think that the roster fit or any of that should or would play any role in the player that they're selecting. But like you said, I think it ultimately could depend on how they're seeing this rebuild. How, we all know it's no secret that the Nets have had their sights set on acquiring another star guy, whether it be Giannis, whether it be before this Donovan Mitchell, whoever you want to put in that conversation. So if they're looking at this being a little bit of a shorter rebuild and that they have their eye on one of those guys, you could be looking at a higher floor guy, could make a little bit more of an impact now, could be a little bit more complimentary, whether that's a Knipple in your eyes, whether that's Kaman Maluak, whoever you want to say, that could play a factor. If they're looking at this as, hey, look, Giannis might have been the guy. We've had our eye on him for a couple years. It didn't work. We struck out. That's not the path that we want to go. Then you could be looking, I think, at a little bit more of an upside swing, like you said, whether that's a Jeremiah Fears, whether that's a Noah Senge, whether that's Yegor Demon, whoever you want to say. I think there's a lot of guys that fit both of those molds. And I think there's some guys who, you kind of try to toe the line between those two paths. So I think that there's just so many different options, different directions that they could go with this 8th pick. And, throughout my coverage in this pod leading up to the draft, I'm going to touch on some of the individual guys and what I think of them, which of those paths, whether it's one or, the other, or whether it's both, that they can fit. And I just think that it's really exciting that they have an opportunity to get a player of this caliber when it's something that, this is an 8th pick. People were disappointed by the 8th pick, but I said, hey, look, Sean Marks hasn't picked higher than 20th. He's been the GM since 18, 19 or whatever it is. So, I think that that's extremely exciting. And I think that is, an opportunity that I think Nets fans should relish.
And you drop some of these guys into a different year, drop them into last year's draft class, right? Next year's going to be pretty deep at the top as well. But you could be talking about at the 8th pick, you could be getting the value of a top 4 guy. That's the reality of how deep this draft class has been. When we talk, you mentioned Demon, because you were out there in Chicago for the Combine. There's a handful of guys that really did themselves a service when they were there and kind of cementing their stock. Demon's this one. So one of the things that Eric's going to be responsible for is defending my mock draft that I ran on the network, which will be coming out, over the next couple of weeks at some point across all the feeds. And listen, it gets fun. There's a lot of movement. A lot of big decisions get made. But Demon, he's lived he's risen up towards 10 at some points, slid back a little bit towards 20. Did the combine with that frame that's very buildable? It looks like he's going to be able to bulk up. The shooting that he displayed there. I keep having this interesting conversation with myself about like where is the right spot to take a player like that. And it does relate to Asenge in some ways as well, but he's playing in Europe right now. He's actually doing some things there that should be getting eyes opened. It's hard to associate that disconnected from the combine. But start with Demon. I'm getting concerned that I might really like the idea of getting him and whether or not it's justifiable to do it at 8, or we talk about condensing picks and trying to get close to the back end of the lottery again.
Yeah, I think that Demon is a really interesting player for a lot of different reasons. I mean, if you look at where he was projected earlier or before this college season, obviously a lot of people had him in the top 10, even creeping up towards the top 5. And there's a reason you can see why. He's 6'8", 6'9", whatever he measured. He has ball handling ability. He has natural fluidity. I think the concern from, what I've watched of him and things that I've talked to with people is just his inability to create separation from defenders a lot of the time in college. And we obviously know the defenders in the NBA, the athleticism, the length, the range, the physicality, all of that is a major step up compared to what he faced at the college level and at BYU. I think what would be a major tool in kind of creating some advantages for him would be his ability to shoot threes off the dribble, his ability to pull up, his ability to make guys go over screens, and then to open up, that pick and roll playmaking ability, that finishing ability around the rim. So there are tools there. He shot it extremely well at the combine. He shot it well at his workouts thus far. So I think that's going to be a huge swing skill for him, as it is a lot of guys who, are bigger ball handling type guys in this draft, like Asparas Yakachonis, another guy that's going to be a big swing skill for. But I think that there's a lot of questions about the ceiling of a guy like him due to, his athletic profile of not being like an eye-popping athlete and kind of the inability that he had to punish some defenses from 3 and his ability to create separation. So I think there's tools there where if it clicks, he can be an extremely impactful player. I just think those questions, I think that's going to put him a little bit behind where the Nets are at 8. So if they want to trade into the lottery and take another swing by packaging 19, 26, 27, CJ, some assortment of that stuff, I think he could be a guy that they could definitely have their eyes on. And I think that he's a guy also, just his attitude, his personality. I got to talk with him at the combine. I think in the interview process of it, I think he's going to do really well. And I think teams are going to, come away impressed with kind of his demeanor, the way that he goes about things. So I think that he'll definitely be an option. I think 8 might be a little too rich to take him there.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And that's the funny part about looking at the draft boards, and you watch these guys, you rewatch these guys. You mentioned Yakachonis. It's like you go, the numbers dipped. Well, yeah, but he had the forearm injury. So you can look past that. You keep trying to rejockey these. And that's why I think everything from kind of that 8 range all the way back to 20, not that you're going to pull a guy up even like Demon and say, oh, he's deserving of the 8th overall pick. But you do. I mean, Doug and I found ourselves constantly going, there's a guy I had at 25 that I would take at 19 easily. Maybe though he's not going to make it to 19, right? Like that movement here has been as wide ranging as I've seen since we've been doing the podcast. When it comes to a draft class, the amount of movement from mid-20s to mid-teens to back a lottery has been substantial. And then some of it comes down to a couple of players have already pulled out and said they're going back to college now, right? Because they're like, I don't like the way this board's shaking out. You got a guy like LeBaron Fillin who didn't partake in the scrimmage stuff, and that was at least enough of a red flag to say, what are you concerned about exposing maybe? And then some guys that I think did pretty well in the combine, but the question is going to remain, right? Because I'll use the comical example. When Ben Simmons was on the Brooklyn Nets and in the offseason, he's putting out videos of like, look at the jumpers that I'm draining. Look at the 3-point shots. There were some that would say, hey, if he can, stop it, right? It's not happening. The shot is not going to happen. So that's the hard part, I think, about combine, especially just when you're showcasing what you can do. It's like, yes, Demon being a great example. There's no defender there. You're not accomplishing this in real game action. So there is that part of it that you have to balance out. Is there anybody, as we close this out, 2 things? One, are there any names as you work your way through the draft that you'll talk about more going forward that you've been keeping your eye on that have kind of, slowly crept their way up the board? We had Maxime Renaud has been like one of those guys that seems to have come in. Is there any guy like that you're going to talk about in the month ahead saying he could cement himself, let's say at 19, or be deserving of that mid-round pick?
I mean, even higher than 19. You touched on the name. I think Noah Senge is a guy that has an extremely wide range. And I think that, if you look at the latest mock drafts from the biggest outlets, I think 2 of them have the Nets taking him at 8. And then you have others that have him at 25. So he has a huge range, and he's a guy that, if we're talking about kind of the debate that you said of floor versus upside, which path do you want to go? He's a guy that has extremely high upside due to his physical tools, to some of the things that he's shown at such a young age. He's only, I think it is three days older than Cooper Flagg. So he's one of the youngest guys in the draft, which is another thing. Like, you talk about evaluating these guys, I talk about Yegor Demin or Yakachonis or Jeremiah Fears or some of these other ball handlers. It's like, all these guys are they're barely 18, 19 years old. It's so hard to pick apart their games. And it's a reason why I don't envy the job of these scouts and NBA front offices to take these guys who have played, a few months of college basketball and try to completely, it's so projection based. It's so going forward. That's why we see so many misses in the draft, because it's just so hard to tell with a lot of these guys. And that's why some of the guys that the Nets might be targeting at 19, 26, 27, if they stay there, are safer and easier, because we've seen them maybe play a couple of seasons of college basketball where you have more of a sample size. Whereas a lot of these guys, like, we're looking at Yegor Demin's workout shooting. It's like, all right, like you said, it's workout shooting. So we'll see if it can translate. But yeah, Asenge would be a guy. I was watching tape of him yesterday. He's definitely a guy I'm going to talk about in the coming weeks. I think just has a really interesting blend of athleticism, physical tools, kind of a projection that you could see some of the, the way that he goes about the game mentally in terms of how unselfish he is. Some of the things he's been able to do passing, the shooting is going to be a swing skill, as I said, for him. And as I said, for Demin and a lot of these other guys. He's a guy that, if I were a Nets fan, I definitely have my eye on as, potentially even creeping up towards that 8th pick, or a guy, if they maybe love the upside, trying to maybe get into the lottery to select him if they think 8 is too high. So he's a guy that I would definitely have an eye on.
Best part about all of this is that no matter what your franchise does, Brooklyn Nets or otherwise, the comparison of, if you traded up, you traded up and you didn't take the right guy the fan base wanted. You traded back and you missed out on the guy, right? All these moves and decisions, especially with 26 and 27, are going to be fascinating. Last thing I'll get you out on is talking about resetting this timeline, year 1 of the rebuild. Do we think, I posed this yesterday on the show, that this does feel like it's poised to be the true opportunity for the rebuild, that ending up in the 8th pick is confirmation for Brooklyn that they need to approach this season as, let's make sure our lottery odds are the best case scenario. Let's lock ourselves into a top 5 next year. Does that mean that Cam Johnson needs to get moved here, especially if it's condensing picks? Like, I keep coming back to, we talk about these guys. If I can move 26 or 27, Cam Johnson, some combination, and be picking at 8, 15, and 19, yeah, that does feel significantly different, even if I'm making 3 picks versus 4.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this, and it's tough, especially.
And I love Cam Johnson, right? He's great. He's a great guy. He's like a model vet. So you hate to talk about jettisoning a player like that, right?
Yeah, and for me, I think it's been that, and it's also just been the way I know that the organization feels about him. When you look at, I think there's going to be some Nets fan PTSD from how the season started last year, of them starting 9 and 10 or whatever it was, and you have Dennis Schroeder looking like Isaiah Thomas, and CJ and Dorian doing what they did, and they obviously got those 2 guys off the roster, but it was too late. So it's kind of a balancing act of how much is CJ alone going to raise the floor of this team. I think he's shown that he can raise the floor based on how he played. He also had a career year last year, so was that somewhat of an outlier year? But I asked Sean Marks about it at his exit interview, and I thought that his answer was somewhat definitive, of saying, he said CJ embodies all these things that we like, and we're in no rush to trade guys like that. So to me, that was an indication that they don't want to trade Cam Johnson. I think that they are putting, a premium on leadership, because regardless of, they're going to bring up, we're talking about them bringing 3-4 rookies in. You still do need some veterans, some leadership guys, some semblance of that. So it's going to be a balancing act of, prioritizing potentially getting their lottery odds where they want to be versus not having any semblance of structure around. So could CJ be traded? I definitely think so. You can never take anything any front office executive says as gospel or anything like that. But I do know the Nets are extremely high on Cam Johnson, not just from what he brings on the court, from what he also brings in terms of a leadership guy, in terms of what he does of just showing guys how to be a pro. So I think all of that's important. And then it also must be said that if they're looking to expedite this timeline, if they're looking at if Giannis is a possibility, if another star after that's a possibility, Cam's a guy, if you want to kind of have the flexibility between those two timelines, he is important for that. So him being traded obviously would be a signal that they're going into that rebuild and they're really leaning into the draft and building through that way. Him being here kind of leaves both of those doors available, in my opinion. So I wouldn't definitely not say that he's safe by any means. He could definitely be traded. I just know how the team feels about him. And I think that how they feel about him does have, it does relate to how you would want to bring out some of these rookies and having some leadership and structure around them.
And that means one thing's for sure. It'll be the trade deadline this year, and we'll be talking about whether or not Cam Johnson gets moved. What stars are available, who's disgruntled, right? But listen, I mean, that's like the beautiful part about covering the Brooklyn Nets and about the NBA at large is like these are the conversations that in a lot of ways like feel like so critical in the moment. And then maybe, a month later, you start to, calm yourself down a little bit more from it. We know that the Brooklyn Nets, listen, was it a little bit of D'Angelo Russell, a little bit of Cam Johnson that led to those couple extra wins this past year that shifted those tank odds? Yeah, it was. So fascinating to see how the Brooklyn Nets, how Sean Marks approach it. One thing we know for sure is that however they approach it, Eric Slater is going to be there covering it for the Brooklyn Nets fan base here on the Locked On Nets podcast. As I said, keep in the loop. This feed doesn't go anywhere. This lives on. The audio feed doesn't go anywhere. We always say it. Subscribe, like, follow, share with a friend, take their cell phone, subscribe them to the podcast, right? Do all those things. I said at the top, I'll say it again. Like we genuinely have interacted and had conversations with Eric over the last handful of seasons. He's an awesome guy. He makes incredible content, incredible writing. So there's nothing not to love and want to support about this. We'll be looking forward to watching you, man, as we approach the draft next month. And then hopefully, for the first time in seemingly a long time, a true rebuild for the Brooklyn Nets, man. Thank you so much for coming on with us, and good luck.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And hopefully, with you on this feed, it's not a goodbye. It's a little bit of a see you later. And we'll circle back and we'll definitely have some more interactions and some more chats about where this Nets team goes. So I'm excited for that.
And we will, as we always do, close out with a quote. Even though Doug Norrie is not here, create your legacy and pass the baton. That is one of the all-time great poets, Billie Jean King. We'll be back here next time. At least Eric will, talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball, 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 basketball.